there is this big question, what in general seems to be going on? You know, I mean, what is life like? Driving back from Halifax the other day, I heard a woman singing that song, "What is this thing called love?" You know. What is this thing called love? And what is it? I mean, I don't know, but it's an interesting question, and it's something that you can muse about, you know, endlessly.
In the year 2000, Alex Colville turned 80. He's been making images that have marked the Canadian imagination since the Second World War.
All right.
You're gonna be sitting on stage.
Oh, I see.
Colville is confident in his role as one of the most important figures in Canadian art, and he receives the adulation easily. Major lifetime retrospectives are not something the National Gallery of Canada bestows on just anyone.
I don't think there can be much doubt that the very decision to become an artist means you're kind of egocentric, you know. The basic assumption is that your life is interesting, that you are perhaps an interesting person, or that you have something to say about life in general.
For most of his life, Alex Colville has lived away from the public eye, but his work is out there, in galleries, on calendars, coffee mugs, book covers.
These are all German novels.
And from his youngest years, he hasn't minded being told how good he is.
Images of mine on the cover. I wasn't a humble kid. Well, these are student things, self-portraits. You have to be brash. After all, you're going to spend your whole life, in a sense, telling people what it's like to be alive.
What is it like to be alive? Colville has been obsessed with asking the question over and over with each new piece of work. What is life like? In the process, he has produced paintings that are explorations of life. They've been quizzical, arresting, at times disturbing.
I do sometimes, because people ask me, and I do sometimes think, looking back on something, you know, how come I would have done that? I'm not looking to present confrontational stuff, but the things that are well up, you know, and all this. For decades, I've been convinced that art essentially comes out of the unconscious. It's not clear what it means, and I think as an artist, one proceeds with it, in a sense, without knowing what, if anything, it means, and there's always the possibility that it's meaningless, you know. But you don't question that. I mean, you just accept this interests me, so I'm going to go ahead with it.
Since the end of World War II, Colville has completed an average of 2 paintings a year, along with numerous editions of serigraphed prints and thousands of meticulous preparatory drawings. He never starts a new project until the one he is working on is finished. Then he frames it himself, crates it, and sends it off to his dealer in Toronto. With each work, Alex Colville seems to be telling a story, yet he never entirely reveals what that story might be. His surroundings become the models for his work, the landscapes, the monuments, the animals, and the people. He has always asked those around him to pose. And no one has posed more than Rhoda, a former artist, Colville's wife and muse.
Yeah, but she had more reason for that than we would.
My mother, of course, always said, you know, dear, I think you do just as good work as Alex, and better in some cases. Mothers are wonderful.
Yes, we've been married. Actually, it'll be 58 years in August. Yes, you know, a terribly long time. And the contractor said, you make eights the same way I do.
They met in art school at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. Colville had grown up nearby, across the broad Tantramar Marsh in Amherst, Nova Scotia.
When I was 9 years old, I almost died of pneumonia. And so one spends days, maybe a week, sort of delirious and kind of out of it. And then along, this is before drugs and everything, you know, then along sort of months-long kind of slow recovery out of school until the next September and everything.
So, alone in his room, he drew. By 1938, Colville had become good enough to turn down a law school scholarship so that he could study fine art at Mount Allison.
There were all kinds of ironies in this. I remember when I entered Mount Allison that fall, there was a guy who I suppose was a graduate student who probably was 25 or 28 or something, who was a kind of counselor to incoming students. And he said, I remember he said to me, he said, your sort of psychological tests and your marks, you know, indicate that you're very academically, that you're very intelligent and academically very good. And I said, this wasn't news to me, you know, and I said, yes, that's so. And he said, but he said, I think that you're making a mistake going into fine arts. He said, after all, painting, and I remember the phrase he used, painting is essentially a matter of manual dexterity. And I thought, well, this guy is stupid, you know, but I didn't say anything.
Benny, come. Benny, come. Come, Benny.
Benny, 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 Benny. Benny, 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 Benny.
We met in the September of 1938 in an entering class of 10 or 12 first-year fine art students.
I wasn't terribly impressed at first when I met him. But there was something that we apparently saw in each other that we had to talk about and deal with and argue about and go on and on talking. No, I think if anything, the tide was still a little bit in when we arrived here. And it'll start in again soon.
So you think it's going up? I was fond of girls, but I was, you know, compared to today, I was a slow, I guess you'd say a slow learner. I had a kind of, you know, generalized fondness for girls, but I actually didn't think about sex much or anything like that.
I don't know what he saw in me, actually, but I spent a long time with him that first year, just talking. But there was a night after we had been to a movie downtown, and we came out of this old movie theater into a very snowy winter night. And there was a crossroads in the town, and we had to go across there to go up York Street. And Alex took my hand when we walked across. With his bare hand, he held mine, and we walked across. That was quite a thrill. Can you imagine that? And I think maybe that was the beginning of the end of the platonic friendship.
So then we were actually in love, in every sense of the word. So that was it. And then as soon as I got into the Army, as soon as I had, in effect, a job, we were married in August of '42.
The Second World War was Colville's professional debut as an official war artist. But before he was issued a paintbrush, he was required to go through the rigors of military training, boot camp and officer school. And even then, he served safely in England, painting everyday life in the Army before entering the theater of war. It was in 1944, a nighttime naval raid in the south of France.
And when we did the operation, amazingly, to everyone's, I think, immense relief, the Germans had pulled out, and there was someone threw up a flare, and there was heavy or medium machine gun fire, a long burst of it, which went overhead, and then nothing, astonishingly. When I look back on it, it's the only place where I could be was up on the deck. So I was the only exposed person on the boat when I look back on it. So I was aware that I was that I was an exposed target.
Lieutenant Colville of Amherst, Nova Scotia.
He was an officer with no troops, a soldier detached from his division. He had a jeep at his disposal, and he went where he wanted. His only orders were to draw and paint.
And so I acquired 2 years of quite intense when I do nothing but paint every day, And of course, nobody tells me what to do. I mean, to an almost unbelievable degree, I have carte blanche,
It was Colville's mission to give a sense of the war, to record his impressions for the official record. But he was a young man, a sensitive and impressionable artist. Much of what he saw was other men, as young as him, some even younger, dying in front of his eyes.
The guy's boots, characteristically, had been stolen. He was very young, 19 or 20, I think. And of course, one of these ace paratroop people. So it seems pretty bad, guy lying there alone, dead. And in the painting, I added the young cow as a sort of, I guess, kind of corny attempt to... Because actually, one of the funny things is that, the landscape in the Second War wasn't devastated in general the way it was in the First. So you have this stuff happening in this kind of beautiful agrarian landscape. It seems more bizarre in a way.
Near the war's end, he received orders to go to Bergen-Belsen in Germany. At the time, Colville was told that the Allies had liberated a concentration camp. He hadn't known what that meant until he got there.
It's hard to know what you think, except that the question of scale, that is, of the numbers, doesn't have the effect that you might think it does. That is, 7,000 dead, are not worse than 7, and 7's not worse than 1, and so on. So that, and altogether, I figured there must have been 35,000 dead people there, in some of them in sweat pits that were still open. And I've said this before, but what one feels is guilt that one doesn't feel worse. Looking back on my stuff, I wasn't, I think, conscious of it at the time, but looking back on my stuff, my view of the war was of it as a sort of tragic mistake. I didn't have any kind of heroism view of it.
It's been called a contradiction, an artist painting a war. Colville had been a dedicated realist, but how could he properly document what he saw at Belsen? His work started to change. He began to create pictures of the war that incorporated his own deeply personal ideas.
This was my idea of typical infantry thing. And of course, it's not heroic. These people are simply trudging along, and there's a corporal in the foreground. I realized later that it was a kind of portrait of my father, in a way, that the man looked like my father. And as Rhoda said, and of course the hands are your own hands. And in fact, I had drawn my hands in a mirror. I thought of my father as a kind of corporal because he had been, you might say, a relatively low-level leader, and I happened to know, I sensed as a child that my father, as a steel worker, was liked and respected by the men who worked with him, the guys in the riveting gang, and that they would bring wine and sometimes live chickens to him Saturday night and so on, so that he was not a sort of hated boss. He was someone that they liked.
With this painting called Infantry, Colville was blending what he saw with what he felt. His father hadn't been to war, but his likeness made a long march through the mud and rain seem more human, more safe.
The thing that I used to spot as a sign of real promise in a young artist was the attempt to transform his or her own experience into art. The thing that makes you unwilling to do it is the unwillingness to turn your children or your wife or whatever into objects of examination by other people and so on. I guess I would say that you have to overcome your reluctance to do this and go ahead and spill it.
Dead crow in the chimney.
Well, there's light coming down, so.
Through Alex Colville's life as an artist, he has always been a realist.
What do you think of that, Benny?
And he has always remained a conservative family man, indistinguishable from his neighbors, the doctors, the lawyers, and the teachers.
What do you think of that, I guess I would call myself a serious person. That may be pompous and so on, but still it's true. So I don't think that life is a joke. In this, I would be different from, let's say, Andy Warhol or something. the essential attitude there is that life is a kind of joke, and you can support that in various ways, but that's not my kind of thing. Life itself is puzzling.
Colville came home from the war and took a position teaching at his alma mater, Mount Allison. He and Rhoda raised their 4 kids in Sackville, and Colville painted. Not the pastoral marsh meadows of the Tantramar, not the stately buildings of the university campus. Colville continued his exploration of life by using his family as models for his work.
Well, I was the child and dog, and the girl skipping, I think my mother was the girl swimming. The girl in August who's walking through the field, the girl stopping the cows and Stop for Cows. Those are the ones I can think of.
I have almost a physical memory of some of the ones that I was in, because I remember the posing was always really quite surprisingly demanding. The triptych that he did for the athletic center at Mount Allison, I think I posed for all 3 of those.
Yes.
And one of them, I remember what it was. It was the high jumper, where I had to pose as a man who is about to take off to go over this bar and hold it. So I had to pose on 1 foot. I'm sure for as long as 10 minutes at a time. Maybe not that long, but pretty close to it.
It's really hard to keep those.
And I remember him saying, "Okay, just hold it, hold it. Okay, almost done,
longer.
almost."
I just would do whatever he said to do, and if he wanted to make drawings, it didn't bother me at all. But I don't know, maybe he felt that it wouldn't be safe to invite some really good-looking girl to come and be a model. You can't hear me. But I don't know whether I would handle that all right or not. I have a kind of deep streak of jealousy in me.
Actually, our marriage, and insofar as the marriage is reflected in the art, accepts the idea that 2 people are actually 2 separate people. They are not one. They are not, we can talk about united in flesh and all that, perfectly true, but you still have 2 separate people who remain separate, and whether they're 20 or 80 or whatever, they're still separate. So what is really interesting is about 2 people who are actually separate, but still there's some kind of effective relationship. And of course, it's a kind of, in a way, a rude thing to do, to throw her into this thing, because all of her instincts and all of her family instincts would be to stay out of the limelight, kind of thing.
Can you imagine how I felt in the Save Easy in Wolfville when I came out to the cash register with my groceries and I saw this magazine with that on the cover? In Wolfville, where I was born and grew up, and it was a little difficult.
I remember talking to him when I was older, when we were driving. We talked a lot when we drove. That was always a good way to have a conversation. And I remember talking to him about something, and he said, there's nothing that hasn't happened somewhere in the world. There's nothing that's really shocking.
Yeah.
And that was true for him. He was not shockable about things, You could count on him to understand anything, really. He was very strong that way.
Colville agonizes over what he does. The thought, the considerations, the emotions, the things the process of making a painting tells him about the world.
In the case of the painting, I am actually in a sense glad to be rid of it, because I've spent months with it, And I've been, to some extent, it's not an exaggeration to say I've been lying awake at night with the thing, you know. My father, as a steel worker, I grew up with blueprints and things like that he would have in the car.
By the time something appears in a Colville painting, it has been measured, moved, tested, considered, and reconsidered. He uses geometry to achieve balance and order, but the tools and the mathematics are merely part of a system that helps Colville place his ideas on canvas.
If you're a young guy who wants to write a proper poetic tribute to his girl, or if you're like me, an old man who wants to paint, you feel the need for a kind of structure, you might say. To put the thing in the baldest way, I think you get a better thing this way.
It's impossible not to spot Alex Colville's new house. He designed it himself, down to the finest details of light and space.
So I was particularly concerned that the skylight in the studio would give the right amount of interior light. And the only way I could really be sure of getting that was to make a model, take the model outdoors, orient it the way the house was to be oriented, that is this side toward the north, and take a typical day like this, and then look in through what is the west window of the studio, look through the model west window into the room, and you see how much light is coming in. And in fact, my decision is there's enough light. This is the kind of light I want to have. So that it's a lot. To make a mistake on the house, to have to change the house, is going to cost a real bundle. To change the model is nothing at all.
This is a house of art and old age. It marks a shift, a period of scaling down that inspired one of Colville's latest works, Living Room.
I guess that is, you know, it's about the idea of contemplation and about the idea of passivity in a way. And also, in a sense, it's about the idea of old age. And it's also about the idea of darkness with the black window.
One of the interesting things for me in that painting is the absolute blackness beyond the window. You know, there is nothing, he's not looking to any, you know, house in the sky. You know, he's not, he does see a kind of nothingness beyond, I think.
The simplest way to put this is to say that I think many people live as if they expected to live forever, and I don't. Now, it's hard to say just what the difference is between someone who expects to live forever, but of course will not, and someone who doesn't expect to live forever and will not live forever. I mean, in both cases, as Lord Kane said, in the end, we're all dead.
Simplement pour souhaiter la bienvenue à leurs excellences et les remercier de l'honneur qu'elles nous font.
Alex Colville sees this as part of the job, graciously meeting the Governor General, accepting the Orders of Canada, the honors and the tributes.
I'm very pleased that you could all be here, and I hope you'll like the stuff you see.
But for his family, this show at the National Gallery is an opportunity to mark something personal. On the walls are familiar images emerging from their own lives. It's a story of love, sacrifice, and death. The Colvilles have always chosen to live in bucolic, picture-perfect hometowns. And yet, Alex Colville has continued to produce provocative, often unsentimental images.
I've heard people say, well, you know, what does that painting mean? And you know, never particularly sarcastically. My response usually would just be, well, you know, does it really matter what it means? I mean, is this like a math problem or what?
But you know, a French critic about 25 years ago wrote I thought, quite illuminating thing about my stuff. He said, it's as if over the horizon there may be something terrible coming up or something like this, you know. Well, I don't certainly deliberately do this. So I'm just thinking, I guess, in a sense, a painting of mine is an attempt at answering the question, what is life like, you know?
What is life like? It's an idea that has preoccupied Colville since art school and haunted him since the war. It has thrilled him through the joys of family and success. And it has disturbed him through the travails of suffering and age and disease.
Actually, I've had a whole lot of successive stuff in a way. And just to kind of run through it and very quick. First of all, there's the prostate cancer thing, from which I made very good recovery. One of the funny things about this, I have bought 2 BMW cars, and each time I bought a BMW, I've had medical catastrophe. And it means I think I'll never buy another one.
Along with the prostate cancer, there has been bowel cancer and an operation to replace a faulty valve in his heart, and a new self-portrait entitled Studio.
About 4 weeks after having the operation, I wake up at 1 a.m. and I realize I think my nose is running, and I realize I have a nosebleed. And stupidly, we don't do anything about it till about 5 o'clock, when I realize I have blood running down my throat. We then go up to emergency. And then I almost died. I almost bled to death.
On the surface, Colville exudes a steely calm, as if there's a lingering military resolve, an ability to cope.
He's not an anxious kind of person, and he's not somebody who gets in a panic or gets in a flap about things.
Yeah, he's not a brittle person. He's not a... I think some people have the misconception that he is a sort of uptight, authoritarian, conservative,
yes.
You know, the brush cut
and, it couldn't be farther from the
military
truth.
background and all that.
Each painting is a meditation, the products of time alone, thinking, considering, contemplating the love and the hurt he has known in the world.
It was either 60 or 61, anyway.
Anyway, we had gone out to have this party in the afternoon, and my brother Charles and my cousin Stephen and I had gone over the hill behind the house, and our dog Sam had come with us. And we realized after a while that the Dayliner train was coming. And we jumped off, and Charles and I, just without thinking about it, we would have been young, jumped on opposite sides of the track, and then we both called Sam. It was just awful. And he stood there, and of course, he was so sweet, and he didn't know
which way to go.
It was just awful. Anyway, the train came through and, of course, killed him. I mean, it was... we turned away like this, and you could just feel all the cinders, and you could just feel how close the train was. It was just... Anyway, then Stephen must have run ahead, because my father was running down the hill, and Stephen had run in and said, Sam's been killed by the train. And my father thought he said, Anne's been killed by the train.
That would be the closest he probably ever was
terrible,
to
and he was just
absolute panic.
Running over the hill.
These episodes have resonance in the story of a family. Their dog's death on the tracks eerily echoes a tragedy from Rhoda's earliest memory.
I've often thought that we have, in fact, been exempt from many misfortunes that other families have had because it all happened in one bunch back in 1929.
I'll tell you what happened. Rhoda's father was very used to driving. He was a very, very busy man.
It was in July, it was the 16th of July in 1929, and her father and her older sister Jean and her older brother Graham and her grandfather and her Aunt Ruby all were got in the car, and were going to see relatives.
My father said, go and ask your grandmother once more if she would like to go. And I went, and I stayed with too long talking to her. And when I came back, Grandpa was kind of cross and said, what took you so long? And I said, she doesn't want to come.
And he's very familiar with the train and the schedule. This was a special. I think they usually have a white flag, a non-scheduled train. And I guess he wasn't expecting it.
The car was hit by a train and they were all killed. It was just, it was just absolutely awful.
And Daddy said, you stay here and have your ice cream. Well, I've been having my ice cream all my life, Everyone's been so good and kind to me.
Colville didn't know Rhoda when her family was killed, but it's a seminal event that went into making a person he loves. It's an unimaginable tragedy that says something essential about life. These are the things he wrestles with. These are the things that inform his art.
I don't think there's any question about that they do inform. And of course, this is true of everybody. But of course, I suppose one of the differences between a person who's an artist and a person who is not is that the artist is always sort of gnawing away at this stuff. There's the very famous quote by W.H. Auden. Someone said to him, what do you feel, what do you think when you've just finished writing a poem? And Auden said, I am a person who has just finished writing poetry, perhaps forever. This is a very famous quote and a very apt one, because when you're working in the arts, you never know whether you have anything left. There is no reassurance, no kind of guarantee at all that you can go on functioning. Partly because one recognizes that the material that an artist uses arises out of the unconscious. And you don't know sort of where your unconscious is, or is it over here or whatever, or whether it's going to kick in again. I I mean, not only do you not know, you know, you may be killed in a car accident or you might die of cancer or something, but in addition, you may physically live, but be finished as an artist.
Well, we're getting old together, which is another experience that you don't think about when you're younger, you know, that you will still be together and still comfort each other and still perhaps annoy each other because you love each other and you hate to see signs of getting older, you know, a little. Sometimes it's easy to get impatient when you're just kind of mad because you're not able to do what you used to do, but then that's where the long love comes in.
People in the Annapolis Valley say that the elm tree at Horton Landing has been growing here for hundreds of years, since the days of the first farms, through hard winters and lightning storms, summer and warm breeze.
My paintings all have conscious beings in them, you know, whether but animals or humans. And this is the only case of a sort of botanical being. But a guy I know, a rather nice man, once said to me that he thinks of the tree as an old man, you know, that it's an old man who's been through a lot of trouble and kind of survived it.